Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. Tonight's video features truly horrifying tales from viewers like yourselves. Be sure to sit back, relax, stay sinful. Story number 1. Every morning I let my dog out in the garden to pee, which requires that I walk out on the street and walk around the building. One morning at 5 a.m., I went out the front door with the dog, and as usual, she likes to sniff the gravel out front. I spotted a man on the opposite side of the road, watching me. Not thinking much of it, I just looked away to show him I wasn't interested. When I looked back up, he had walked closer, so I looked back down. I looked up again one final time, but this time he was standing right in front of me, on the opposite side of a small fence. Creeped out, I quickly grabbed my dog, since she's very small, and walked around the building. I felt his presence behind me, so instead of being trapped in a small garden with him, I circled around the building and went back inside. A couple of minutes later, I'm standing by the kitchen window, which overlooks a parking lot. When I looked up, I saw him again, leaning against a small shed, just watching me. I quickly walked away from the window, freaked out and figuring out what to do. I contemplated whether or not I should take a picture of him, but eventually decided not to. When I looked back out the window, he was gone. He had completely vanished. Story number 2. I was around 14 years old, riding my bike at night and taking some photos. I decided to ride on top of a nearby mall to get a better view. There was no one there, and after 10 minutes, I went to go to the other side when someone pulled up in their car. They pulled up next to me and rolled their window down, asking if I'd like to buy their son's Xbox 360. I declined, saying I don't want one since I had a computer. He offered to bring me back to his house to look at it, and at that time I didn't realize how terrifying this situation was, and how badly it could have gone. The mall I was at had lots of cameras, so I assumed he was trying to make it look like I was leaving with him willingly, like I knew him. I wasn't going to get kidnapped. I told him I didn't have any money for it, and to have a good night. He went and pulled away to the ramp entrance to the parking garage above the mall, and after a while I slipped away at the other exit. Story number 3. My name is Alex, and I recently posted a story on this channel not long ago. The story continues from when I received a text from a man who broke into my home and chased me into my bathroom. After getting that text that read, "You were lucky in that bathroom," I couldn't sleep. Like I said, I was so paranoid that guy was still out there watching me. I kept taking a quick look through my blinds to see if I could see anything. That's how I spent that night, checking through the blinds and watching South Park. I reported the text to the police the next day, and they said they would look into it. Life goes on, and I still had to go to work the next day. Like before, I would get home around 3, 2 or 3 hours before my mom would. I was scared to enter my own house, to be honest, and did so with caution. I tried to relax and not let this fear take over my life. I went to use the bathroom, and then walked into my bedroom to change, and then headed downstairs to make a snack. As I was walking downstairs, I noticed the front door was open. When I say open, it was slowly swinging like someone had quickly darted out the house. I tried to think rationally and thought maybe I left it open, or maybe I didn't close it properly, and the wind had blown it open. That night around 12:30, I received another text from an unknown number. This time the text read, "Check under your bed." My heart started racing, thinking that guy was under there hiding. I checked under my bed. He wasn't there. There was an iPhone. I received another text shortly after. Go into messages. I checked the messages app. There was only one mail. It was a video. Nervously, I hit the play button It was someone recording themselves placing a phone under my bed, scanning my bedroom, and in the audio background you can hear me coming upstairs, and then see me heading into the bathroom that was filmed through a crack of my bedroom door. Then whoever was filming ran quietly downstairs and out the door. I suddenly felt the need to check outside, and this time I did see someone, a figure standing outside my backyard watching me. Before walking away, I had enough time and I showed my mom. We didn't bother with the police as they haven't been very helpful. The next morning we packed our things and went to stay with our relatives in North Carolina. We plan on moving out there soon. I have no idea if the man who was in our house was the same as the one who ran after me up the stairs. I have no idea. This experience has scared both me and my mother. Hopefully we can have a fresh start out there. Story number 4. My name is Calvin, and I'm 25 years old. This story happened when I was 12. I lived at home with my mom and dad and younger brother Joel, who was 9 at the time. My parents were going to be gone all evening to a work party my dad had to attend. My mom trusted me to look after my brother until they returned. Me and Joel were excited to be left alone and decided to order a pizza. We watched a horror movie we weren't allowed to see and played some Need for Speed on PS2. Eventually, like most kids do, we got bored and tried to figure out what else we could do to pass the time. I remember we still had our old Nintendo 64 packed up in our attic, and it had been a while since we played it, so Joel and I decided to head into the attic to see if we could find it. I'm not sure how long we were looking around, and I didn't know what the time was, but we couldn't find the Nintendo 64 anywhere. "It's not here," Joel said. "It's in here somewhere," I replied. At that point we heard the front door open and close, and I said, "Mom and Dad are home now. Ask them where it is." I continued looking while Joel went and asked our parents. Not even 30 seconds later, Joel came running back into the attic. "What did Mom say?" I asked. "It's not Mom and Dad," Joel loudly whispered. "What? What do you mean?" "It's some strange man." I started to hear footsteps coming up our stairs. As quietly as I could, I pulled the steps up and closed the latch, praying the man didn't hear anything. I gestured to Joel to keep quiet by pressing my fingers to my lips. I could see the latch to the attic was being pulled, and I quickly grabbed it and held it as tight as I could. After a few tries, thankfully the man stopped, and I could hear footsteps walking down the hall away from the attic. Unfortunately, one of the boxes we had been searching through fell on the floor and made a large noise. At this point, the man ran back up to the attic latch and started yanking the cord, this time very aggressively, trying to force it open. I wasn't sure how long I was able to hold it for. I told my brother Joel to go and hide. I don't know why, but the man abruptly stopped and ran off somewhere. I assumed out of the house. I still held a firm grip on the attic latch. I knew it was safe because I heard our parents downstairs calling our names. The man must have heard them and got spooked and decided to run away. Joel and I ran down to our parents and told them what had happened. The police were called and we told them what happened. Also, Joel gave a description of the man as best as he could. To this day, we had no idea who that man was, how he got in, and what he was planning on doing. It's scary to think what might have happened if we weren't in the attic. Story number 5. My name is Rose. I'm 28 years old. The story happened to me last week. I was sitting down one evening around 9:30 p.m. watching TV when I could smell smoke coming from the window behind me. This confused me a lot, as I live in a very rural area next to a large forest. There are no walking paths of any kind, and my nearest neighbor is about a mile away, so there shouldn't be any people around this area, especially this time of night. I peeked out the window and couldn't see anything. I let it go, About 30 minutes later, I could smell smoke again. I checked the window and still couldn't see anything, but this time I decided to go outside and have a better look for myself. I couldn't see anyone or anything, but what I did see under my windowsill were about 10 cigarette butts and lots of footprints. I immediately felt sick and became very paranoid of my surroundings. I quickly ran inside to phone the police, but the phone was dead, and then I looked for my cell phone but I couldn't find it. As I was too distracted with searching for a phone, I failed to notice the muddy footprints that have led into my house and up the stairs. I looked up the stairway and saw 2 men standing there watching me. I screamed and ran outside and slammed the door behind me. I heard footsteps bomb down the stairs. I ran as fast as I could down the road and kept looking behind me, and I could see the 2 men weren't following me. I decided to run all the way to my nearest neighbor, a mile away, and call the police. It took a while, but the police did arrive and escort me back to my property. I anxiously waited in the police car as they searched my house. Thankfully, nothing was stolen or damaged, except my cell phone. The police also saw the intruders cut the phone line. They snuck in as I was searching around outside. I spent most of that night paranoid while searching online about home surveillance. I kept checking out the window to see if anyone was around, and there was. I could see in the distance, in the woods, 2 men standing there watching my house. I'm now considering moving. Story number 6. I grew up in a very small town surrounded by farmland. When I was 17, I bought an old convertible from Craigslist for a couple $100, and of course, thought it was the coolest thing that ever existed, so I spent as much time as possible in it. Also around this time, I'd heard from 2 separate friends in school that their dogs had gone missing, about a few weeks apart. While this was really sad and I felt for them, it wasn't exactly uncommon in a semi-rural town where a lot of yards either didn't have fences or just had run-down ones. The 3rd dog to go missing that I heard of was actually my neighbor's. Her name was Molly and she was a poodle. 2 nights after I heard about Molly, I drove my car to this long dirt road at the edge of town to have some alone time and smoke. There are no houses on this road, and it's over a mile long. It's surrounded on all sides by woods for a section, and then by an enormous cornfield. At one point in the road there was a small gravel patch off to the side, cutting into the corn a little bit, and this is where I would park my car. I'd done this a couple times before. I took the roof down, turned the car off, and sat for about 10 minutes in the quiet, just enjoying the night to myself. I'd like to mention here that this road is about as out of the way as it gets, and the corn stretches for over a mile in both directions, on either side of the road. This is not a common place to see another person, not even during the day. I started to hear some rustling in the corn. I passed it off as being very paranoid, but the noise kept getting closer, and it became pretty obvious that there was a person coming my way. I was extremely confused and weirded out, and I completely froze. The roof was down, the car was off, and whoever this was could just jump in or yank me out of my car, you name it. But I just froze in my seat, facing front, and didn't move. There were no streetlights on this road, and I was sitting in complete darkness. I heard this person push out of the corn, and I heard them walk across the road. They were walking slowly, and it sounded like they were wearing boots or something with a heavy sole, and then I heard their footsteps on the gravel patch. I moved my eyes up to the rearview mirror, saw a large man, pitch black, so I can't say anything about what he looked like. He walked slowly behind my car, not 3 feet from the bumper, and pushed into the corn again. He just kept walking. He had to have seen me, and he said nothing. He didn't even look my way, just kept going. I turned the car on and gunned it out of there. I laughed it off with friends later in the week. I actually totally forgot about this until a couple months after, when I'd moved out to college and got a call from my mom. She said her friend Reed, the guy who owned the cornfield and the attached farm, had found several dead dogs in his corn when he went to harvest, one of which was a poodle. Totally possible the two are unrelated, but still, man in the corn, let's not meet. Story number 1. This story happened to me in 2005. My name's Colin. I went to the Champions League final in Istanbul with 2 of my friends to watch our favorite team, Liverpool, to play against AC Milan. The match was incredible and Liverpool won the cup. After the match had ended, my friends and I were walking back to our hotel when I saw 2 men down an alleyway who were selling football souvenirs. I wanted to go and purchase a pin, so I said to my friends, "Go on ahead and I will catch up." I went down the alley, picked out the pin, and I went to hand one of the men the money. The money I gave him was Turkish lira, but when I handed it to him, I realized I gave him too much. I just gave him £100 worth. The man who had just received the money realized this too. I asked him to give it back, but he ran off up some stairs and down another alleyway. Naturally, I gave chase. He turned a corner when I followed after. I saw the man standing next to about 5 other very large men. The men were carrying knives and started to approach and surround me. I was in some major danger at this point. When I turned around to run away, there was another man blocking me, holding a knife. I honestly thought I was about to get murdered. The next thing that happened I can only describe as a miracle. Someone nearby had shot about 3 flares in the air to create somewhat of a blinding light. Fortunately, this had distracted the men. It was enough for me at least to push past the guy blocking me and run as fast as I could down the alley. I could hear footsteps and yelling behind me. The men also tried throwing things at me as they chased. They threw a few empty glass beer bottles along with a few knives, which thankfully never hit me. I eventually ran out onto a main street where some more fans were. I got to the hotel I was staying at and made it in one piece. I hate to imagine what would have happened to me if those flares didn't go off, or if the men had caught up. If you're ever in a country you're unfamiliar with, make sure you stay on the main streets and never go into alleyways alone. Story number 2. This story happened to me last week. My name is Robert. I was driving home late around 10 p.m. The road I was driving on was pretty empty. You could see a truck pass by in a car now and then, but overall it was pretty deserted. There was a car behind me, and it had been there for a while. I didn't really think anything of it at the time. There was nothing suspicious at that very moment. At some point during the drive, I needed to pull over to take a pee. I pulled over to the next chance I got and opened the door slightly. And I say slightly because I noticed something in my rear view mirror. The same car that had been behind me also pulled over. At this point, I then closed my door and waited. I just watched to see if whoever was driving the car was going to get out and do something. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Either way, I didn't get out. I decided to start my car and carry on driving. And as soon as I did, the car behind me did too. Now I was suspicious. This person was definitely following me. I even slowed down a great deal just to see if they could overtake me, but they never did. The car started to speed up. At first I thought it was going to finally overtake me, but it drove beside me. I looked inside the car and surprisingly I found that it was a woman who looked out of her mind. Her eyes were bulging wide. Her hair looked very messy, like she hadn't showered in weeks. She was extremely skinny and had tattoos all over her body. She was screaming at me. She looked to be high on meth or something. She then started ramming her car into mine, nearly causing me to crash. The next thing she did was so terrifying. She pulled out some kind of handgun and started pointing it in my direction. She didn't fire any shots, or at least get the chance to, because I slammed on the brakes as soon as I noticed the gun. and realized that this crazy woman might actually shoot me. As soon as I slammed on my brakes, the woman lost control and crashed into a rail. I accelerated and drove straight past the woman's car as fast as I could. I thought she might be dead after the crash, but that thought was quickly forgotten, as the next thing I heard in the distance was screaming and gunshots. The crazy woman who tried to kill me was still alive. Story number 3. This happened when I was 10 years old. My dad was working abroad, so it was just my mom, sister, brother, and myself living in a rural area. One night around midnight, someone started pounding on our door. We lived in a very safe place, so no one locked their doors. But since my dad wasn't around, my mom was a bit paranoid and always made sure that the doors were locked for the night. She went to the door and without opening it asked who was there. Some guy replied saying he was coming back from a party, was trying to walk to town, and got lost and if she could let him in. My mom said that he was walking in the wrong direction because he was walking away from town and pretty much gave him directions how to get there. But he still kept saying he was lost and to please let him in. At this point, my older brother screamed across the house to ask my mom what was going on. When the guy heard my brother, he literally took off running. We could literally hear heavy footsteps. We heard a car door slam and a car driving off with screeching tires. My mom later said that this guy must have thought there was an adult male in the house because my brother's voice was very deep. We don't know what this guy wanted, but sure enough his intentions were not good since he lied about being alone and walking. My mom phoned the police and they drove around the neighborhood, but they couldn't find anything. So to the creepy guy trying to get into our house in the middle of the night, let's not meet again. Story number 4. We live in a small European country, and at the time it was safe to leave the door unlocked. There was an open balcony connected to the main bedroom, and we were on the ground floor. It was a hot summer night and my dad left the glass balcony door ajar to let some air in. His bed was right next to the balcony door, and he remembers waking up feeling uncomfortable and not being able to fall asleep again. In the meantime, it started raining. He started feeling frustrated and got up to smoke, stopping in his tracks when he saw fresh, muddy footprints leading all the way to the glass door. They were around size US 12.5, and it looked as if the person had been standing there for quite some time, possibly trying to break in, but seeing my dad or something else. He quickly locked the door and went to check on me. It was after that incident that he enclosed the balcony. I was very young and didn't even remember it. That room is now my room, and the first time he told me that story, I wasn't able to sleep for days. So to the muddy footprints man, let's never meet. Story number 5. It was a Sunday early in the morning. I live in the suburbs, but my parents own a farm that I enjoy going to because I get to see my dog. Molly is a mutt, but she's not a tiny dog by any means. At that time, I felt very safe around her and would often take her for walks in the forest that was nearby. That day started off like any other. My dad and I got in the car, drove around for a while, and arrived at the farm. I immediately got out of the car and hugged Molly. My parents always got angry when I hugged her, since I smelled like her for the rest of the day. I put her leash on and asked my dad if I could take her for a walk. He always thought that we would just go down a road and back, but I always found it more interesting to take her into the forest. I always felt a certain kind of peace and relaxation there that was unmatched by anything else. So we took a turn and headed to the forest. Usually when we got there, I'd take her leash off so she could explore on her own. Most of the time I would carve my name into a tree or look for anything else interesting. I was playing baseball with some rocks and a wooden leg, presumably from an old table, and then I heard it. Molly was barking at something. This wasn't unusual when we were in the forest. I thought it was a fox or some other animal, so I quickly grabbed the wooden leg for a weapon. I knew that if it was a fox, I wouldn't attack it, but I had a sense of security while I was holding it. I called out, "Molly, Molly," but she just kept barking. This was very strange for me since she always came to me when I called her. I followed the sound of her barks and stumbled across a scene I'll never forget. There was a man, probably in his late 50s, half naked, carrying a large machete in one hand and holding moonshine in the other. This was the first time I stumbled across someone in the woods, let alone someone half naked and carrying a big-ass machete. He was completely ignoring Molly and hacking away at the ground for some reason. I didn't really know how to handle the situation. Even now, I have no idea how I would handle it. "Sir, are you okay?" I asked in confusion. I don't think I understood the seriousness of the situation at the time. He turned around, revealing his face. He had some of the clearest blue eyes I've ever seen to this day. I could see them so well because they were open wide. "Come here, boy. Look what I've dug up." I was afraid that if I didn't listen to him, he would start chasing after me, and that was something I wanted to avoid at all costs. I got closer but kept a fair distance. I didn't see anything, except for an empty hole in the ground. He returned to hitting the ground with his machete, occasionally taking sips from the bottle. I used this window of time to get my dog and started walking away slowly, as to not notify him that I was leaving. But then I took one final glance at the man. His head was dug deep in the hole. I was intrigued, so I kept looking. I know how stupid of me. He finally got up from the ground. I was shocked when I saw him carrying a bone in his mouth. I have no idea what animal it belonged to, if it even did belong to an animal. I had seen enough and started sprinting with my dog. As we ran, I heard him laughing, and then I saw something flying from the corner of my eye. It was that damn machete. I heard him yell, "Damn it!" This made me run even faster. I know the forest very well, so I wasn't afraid of getting lost. I ripped through the branches and bushes until I got out of the forest, but I didn't stop sprinting until I arrived at the garage, where my father was testing out lights on our tractor. I didn't tell him a single thing about the man, since I was afraid that he'd get angry and wouldn't allow me to walk Molly anymore. Needless to say, I never went to the forest alone again. Man with that giant machete and bone in your mouth, let's never meet again. My name is Mark and I'm 58 years old, and this story happened 20 years ago. I used to be a truck driver working the night shifts. I did that for about 7 years and enjoyed it for the most part. The pay was good and I liked the quiet time that I got to myself. One night I was driving listening to the radio and drinking coffee like I usually do. It was really dark on the secluded roads I was driving on, with no street lamps around. All I could see were my own headlights and the road it lit up. It was also pouring down rain. I came across a car that was pulled over to the side of the road, and two men who then ran into the forest, leaving the car doors open. I don't know why, but something made me stop and pull over as soon as I drove past. I turned my radio off and thought about what I just saw and what I should do. After some thought, it did look odd, so I decided to check it out. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the road towards the car. When I got there, I couldn't see anyone around. I spoke out and said, "Hello? Anyone there?" I shined my light in the car and had a look inside. The car was on and the keys were in the ignition. I mumbled to myself, What's going on here? Just as I said that, I heard a branch snap in the woods. "Hello? Who's there?" No answer. I called out again. "Is anyone there? Are you hurt?" I was starting to think I shouldn't be here. Whoever those men were who ran off clearly didn't want me to know something and didn't need any help. I turned around, about to jog back to my truck, when I heard a bump. I stopped and listened. I heard it again. It was coming from the trunk of the car. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I needed the keys. I quickly got them out of the ignition and opened the trunk, and I couldn't believe what I saw. There was a woman who was gagged and tied up. She was bleeding on her forehead and tears streaming down her face. I removed the cloth from her mouth and she was begging me to help her. Before I could do anything, the two men ran out of the trees and attacked me. One of them hit me really hard on my knee with a crowbar, and I dropped to the floor screaming in pain, whilst the other one hit me with a bat on my legs a few times to make sure I wasn't getting up. They both ran into the car, slammed shut the trunk, and drove off. That whole time I could hear the woman screaming for help. I tried to get up, but I was in too much pain and I couldn't stand. I managed to crawl back inside my truck and radio for help. I told police what happened. That woman was never seen again. Story number 2. I was driving home one night, as I had not seen my family for 2 weeks. Filled with excitement, I decided to take a shortcut through a desolated area that I didn't know too well. I had heard stories through the scanner about it, mostly ghost tales, and I do as a matter of fact believe in ghosts, but my eagerness to surprise my wife and kids got the best of me. It was 3:40 a.m. or so in the morning, and I had been on that particular road for about an hour already. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened yet. Suddenly, I get to an area packed with old creepy trees on the side and tons of shrubbery. As usual, my radio was on, and out of nowhere the horrible static starts crackling through the speakers. I started to feel chilly and uncomfortable when, wouldn't you know, I saw a man hanging from a tree on the side of the road. There he was. His body was even swinging from side to side. I stepped on the brake as fast and as carefully as I could, but I kept looking through the rear view mirror, and he was still there. I grabbed my coat, my gun, and my flashlight, and I had my phone in my pocket and I started to dial 911. But there was no signal. I made my way through the shrubs, and when I reached the tree, he was gone. I moved the flashlight around thinking maybe he had gotten free. I went back to my truck, looked back, and there he was again, hanging like I had seen him before. After this, let's just say I didn't take any shortcuts anymore. Story number 3. My friend and I stopped at some shady truck stop off Interstate 37, going towards Corpus Christi, Texas. He fell asleep as usual, and I'm not gonna lie, I was about to pass out too. I finally decided to pull over and I fell asleep, when a little while later we heard a loud bang on the side of the cab that startled us. We woke up immediately to find this large lizard-like creature with red glowing eyes and sharp-looking teeth staring back at us. No, it wasn't the creature from the movie Jeepers Creepers, and you don't have to believe me, but we both know what we saw that night. It stood there I don't know how many minutes just looking at us. Nothing else. After that, it flew over the cab and took off in the dark of night. Story number 4. During the summer of 2005 and 2006, around 2 a.m. driving back from Rushville, Illinois. About northeast of the town, there's a rural area filled with cornfields and woods. My father was driving and I was in the passenger seat when my dad suddenly taps my shoulder, points out the window, tells me to look. About 300 yards out or so, there's a large object flying a few hundred feet away from the ground, smoothly and constantly passing us. It looked like it had either 1 or 2 levels, rows of lights that went along the side and bright large rectangle windows with rounded corners spewing out white lights. It made no sound and it flew straight. It did not rotate and had no blinking or flashing lights of any kind, indicating that it could be some sort of small plane or traditional aircraft. It kept flying straight forward and disappeared in the distance. I turned to my dad and we both looked at each other and said, "That was interesting." We proceeded to continue driving home with no further incident. Story number 5. Many years ago, I was on a shift called Meet and Turn. This is where the driver that is domiciled out of the city will drive a load halfway to its destination, while the other driver that meets him halfway and brings the load where it needs to be delivered. I had been doing runs like these for several months, and I found out that I had to meet on point an hour before the other driver arrived. It was a dark and empty lot around 3:30 a.m., so since there was still some time to kill, I decided to close my eyes and take a short nap. About 10 minutes into my nap, I was awakened by a barking dog. I tried to ignore it, but the bark carried on for several minutes and grew louder and closer. At this point, it became clear that he's either trying to alert me of something, or he's just being a pain in the butt. I sat up and looked out my window, and what I saw left me motionless. Standing there, inches on the other side of the glass, was a man around 35 years of age. He was a large fellow, and he was barking at me. His eyes were crazy, and he was even frothing a little from his mouth. The sheer creepiness struck me, and gently, without making any sudden movements, I reached down and started my truck slowly, started to pull away. As I was doing so, he was chasing after me, much like you would expect an angry dog, and still barking as I kept pulling away. Needless to say, I don't take naps on the job anymore. Story number 6. I used to drive between San Francisco and Cheyenne, Wyoming, a lot of times. It's about a 16 to 20-hour drive depending on the weather. My second time driving that route, I was driving at night, when suddenly my truck starts to make this odd grinding noise. It sounded like I had run over something and it got stuck. It was 2 a.m. I pulled up to a very well-lit rest stop and wake my buddy up, who had been sleeping the whole time. As we both make our way out of the vehicle, I started to explain to him the situation about the grinding noise. When we started to hear what sounded like a child crying, there's not a car in sight beside ours. At the same time, we had heard frequent stories about child trafficking and kidnappings nearby, so we decided to check it out. We grabbed our flashlights and made our way towards the bathrooms, since the noise was coming from there. As we got closer, we realized it was coming from the woman's bathroom. It's a low, dull sobbing, and we were prepared for the worst. We walked in expecting to see someone brutally beaten or worse. We see nothing but only hear the sound. It is still there, but there's no one there. It's completely empty. We turn the lights on and still nothing. We checked each stall just to make sure and nothing. We even looked exactly where the noise was coming from and again, nothing. Is it a hidden camera? A speaker? What the fuck? My buddy sees a small window and opens it, and the noise deceased. We stood there for a few seconds and the window slammed shut on its own. Crying begins again. We were out of the bathroom in seconds as we ran towards the truck, and you could still hear the crying. Of course, the grinding noise is still there, so this time I pull up to another rest stop some miles away, where we checked underneath. We saw some sort of red and silver metal stuck right in there. We couldn't take it out. A few days later, I took it to a mechanic buddy of mine, and he told me that the piece of scrap metal that was stuck was part of a kid's bicycle. I don't know if this is somehow related to our experience, but it was one of those moments for me that I will never forget. Number 1. My name is Craig and I'm 15 years old. I love to play ice hockey, and I play on a team. After practice, I always stay behind to work on my shooting. I'm the only one who stays behind while the rest of the team heads home, but I like it that way. I prefer to have the ice to myself. I was doing my thing after practice like usual when I heard some skates on the ice. I turned around to see someone standing at the other end of the ice rink. He was tall, wearing an old hockey goalie mask. He had long black hair and an old Anaheim Ducks jersey on. For a second I thought it was one of my teammates or coaches playing a prank on me. He was just standing there staring at me. I said, "Who's that?" "Scotty, is that you?" No answer. He then slowly passed a puck towards me, and it slowly stopped right in front of me. He then tapped his stick on the ice like when you call for a pass. I didn't do anything, only stare uncomfortably and confused at this strange guy. He tapped his stick on the ice once more, this time more aggressive. I nervously then passed the puck back to him. He then passed it back to me. I wanted to leave the rink because this guy was creeping me out, and I didn't know who he was. He certainly wasn't a teammate or anyone I knew, but the exit was on the other side of the rink, right where the creepy guy was. He tapped his stick once again, still aggressively, so I passed the puck back to him and he passed it back to me. I spoke out saying, I think I'm going to call it a night." When I said this, he turned around, and I thought he was going to leave. But unfortunately, he never left, but he walked over to the door to close the door to the ice rink. At this point, I was extremely scared. He then skated fast, really fast towards me. I thought he was about to attack me, but he stopped abruptly right in front of me. Now staring into my eyes, he looked angry. I couldn't say or do anything. I was honestly frightened for my life at this point. This man was much bigger than me and could easily overpower me. He then slid aside, sort of saying that I can go past. I then quickly skated to the other end of the rink and exited through the door. I turned around to see what the strange man was doing. He was just standing there watching me. I walked off towards the changing rooms when I heard a tapping coming from the rink. I don't know who that man was or what he was doing. It was obvious he wasn't all there in the head. This took place about a month and a half ago, and I haven't seen the guy since. I still stay behind after practice, but I'm always paranoid I'm going to hear that tapping on the ice. Story number 2. When I was about 13, I was playing football with 3 of my friends. 2 of them were 13 and 1 of them was 11. The youngest one was a friend's younger brother. We were on the field playing football, having a good time, and at one point the ball got booted over the fence into a garden. We were having a little argument over who should go over and get it. Just as we were discussing it, a man walked onto the field with a football of his own. He said, "Hey boys, you can play with my ball if you'd like." The man didn't look right at all. I couldn't see any children with him, or anyone around the park for that matter, so it was clear he was there on his own. He was wearing a football jersey that was too tight for him, and shorts were way too short. My friends and I awkwardly looked at each other, confused. Then one of my friends said, "Okay, we will play with your ball." Unexpectedly, the man said, "Great, so I can play with you." I'm not sure about the rest of my friends, but I thought this was very odd. Why was a 30-year-old wanting to play with 4 young boys who were complete strangers? We were a bit confused, but still we were young and just wanted to play football, so we agreed and let him play. We each introduced ourselves to him, but when we said our names, he gave each of us a hug, kind of like you do with your friends. Only we weren't friends, and the hugs went on for a few seconds longer than they needed to be. The man said his name was Evan. We started to play football and kick the ball around. During our playtime, every time the man tried to tackle, he was always overly physical with us. He would always use his hands to grab us when we were too close to him. He did things that were completely unnecessary. I said, "I think I'm going to head home. I'm pretty tired." 2 of my friends agreed. Whether or not they had enough of this weirdo, I don't know. But the 11-year-old kept saying he wanted to stay and play football, as if there wasn't enough red flags going on. The strange man then said, "Well, He can come to my house and play football. I'll drop him off later. My friend, who is the brother of the young boy, said, no, he has to come home with us. The man then put his hand on the back of the 11-year-old boy and said it's no problem. He can have fun at my house and I will give him back later. I grabbed the young boy's hand and walked him out of the field. The man just stayed on the field looking at us as we walked away. I won't ever forget his face. The man went from smiling and happy to the most bitter, crazed psycho I had ever seen. It was quite clear that that man had only one thing in mind. Story number 3. It was a nice sunny day outside, and me and a bunch of my friends were playing baseball in the nearby park in our neighborhood. We were about 15 or 16 years old at the time. During the game, I went to get a sip of water from my bag when I noticed a hooded man sat on a bench watching us. At first, this wasn't unusual, but I kept my eye on him the whole time we were playing, and I noticed he never left the bench, never met with anyone, and never took his eyes off of us. I thought, yeah, it was weird, but I tried to just enjoy playing baseball with my friends. At some point during the game, I was out fielding and happened to notice the man had gone from the bench. I thought to myself, okay, see, I knew it was nothing. The ball got hit and went over near some bushes next to where the hooded guy was sitting. I was closest, so I ran over around the bushes to get the baseball. I couldn't find it. I looked around while my friends were yelling at me to hurry up. Suddenly, I noticed a man standing, hiding behind a tree. It was a guy that was on the bench from earlier. He was looking at me with a menacing expression on his face. He then pulled something out of his pocket and said, "Looking for this?" It was a baseball. I said, "Oh, yeah, thanks for finding our ball." I put my hands up gesturing for him to throw me the ball. He put the ball back in his pocket and said, "Come here and take it from me." I hesitated, standing there watching him with nervous confusion. I asked him, "Can't you just throw it to me?" He laughed and said, "Nah, that would be too easy." I didn't know what he meant by that, and I just knew it was nothing good. He then dropped the ball on the ground, about a yard away from himself. There you go. I took one step forward and saw he had one hand in his pocket, and just as I took a step forward towards him, his hand had tightened whatever it was that he was holding. I didn't want to find out what was in his pocket, so I just said, "Keep it." I went back to my friends and said I couldn't find it. It was no big deal, as we always had 4 or 5 extra baseballs with us. The rest of the day, I enjoyed playing with my friends, even though I was pretty distracted. I managed to forget about the guy for the rest of the day. Later that night around 9 p.m., I was playing Xbox Live and eating Doritos when my mom asked me to take out the trash. As I went outside to my backyard to throw the garbage away, I heard footsteps on the other side of my fence, along with a glass bottle being kicked around. I said, "Hello? Who's there?" Of course, I didn't get a response. I turned around and started walking back inside the house when I heard a slight thud behind me. I turned around to see the baseball from earlier rolling towards me in the grass.
This happened in the early 2000s, and I was around 12 years old. My dad passed away 2 years before, leaving my mom, sister, and myself. To help cope with my father's passing, my mom took me to an animal shelter to pick out a dog, since having a large dog is something I always wanted. In one of the cages was a small shepherd husky, huddled up in the corner, that right away I fell in love with. When this incident happened, he was 1 year old, 90 pounds. My mom was working nights, and my older sister was taking advantage that my mom wasn't home, and would constantly leave me alone. I didn't mind though, because then she couldn't boss me around. Since when she was home, she would try being mom and telling me what to do and when to go to bed. We lived in a small middle-class suburb with low crime rate, and I wasn't scared to be home alone. So this night, I was sitting home in the living room playing a video game, and had gotten up to go to the kitchen to grab a drink. In the kitchen, I had a clear view through the back door and could see that the garage was open. I headed out to close it. My dog was sleeping in the basement, since he liked to lay on the cold floor during the summer months, and at the time I didn't think of taking him out with me. I step out the door and make it about 5 feet, when I noticed in the darkness a crouched shadow moving in the garage. I froze, trying to get my eyes to adjust to make out what the shadow was. It finally hit me when I saw the figure stand up and turn towards me. I was terrified and felt like I had been glued to the spot. I knew this person could see me since the back porch light was on and shining above me. At that moment, the figure started running towards me. I was too scared to move and let out more of a yelp than a scream. But that was all it took for my dog to hear, and the next thing I hear is him behind me, snarling and growling. I could make out it was a man, but no features, as he was now frozen, seeing the 90-pound beast behind me. He turned and ran for the back fence with my dog right behind him. The guy made it to the fence, and since it was only 4 feet, he hopped right over it before my dog got to him. After he got away, my dog came running back to me, and we went inside where I barricaded the doors. I don't know why I didn't call the cops, and I never told my mom or sister what happened. One thing that still bothers me was he had to know that I was inside, since the lights were on and the blinds were open. So why did he risk hitting a house where he knew someone was clearly home? The next morning, after my mom was home, I went outside and finally closed the garage, and noticed that he had been going through my dad's toolbox. I locked the garage and never told anyone what happened. I walked my dog to McDonald's and got him a hamburger and an ice cream cone for being my hero. It was early July. I had just begun my senior year of college, but was home for the summer. While at home, I met Lisa on Tinder. Lisa lived in the same town as my college and invited me to come stay with her for the weekend. I happily obliged because, dat booty. The weekend with Lisa went great. We started dating. I returned a couple weeks later. It's now late July, or early August 2012. My housing for the upcoming year was going to be in our fraternity housing, off campus. We had a main house, the big house, and a smaller house in the backyard, the little house. I needed to clean up the little house, as I was going to move into it, since it was left pretty filthy by the previous tenants. Lisa offered to help, so we spent most of our time in there. The little house was stockpiled with furniture that people had left for the summer instead of taking home. There were probably 6 or 7 couches stuffed into a teeny living room, so you literally had to hop from one to another to navigate the room, which we made a game of it, and made great use of them during the weekend. Sorry, bros. To give you an idea of the layout, the little house was a ranch-style brick home with 3 adjacent bedrooms at the back of the house, and a kitchen and living room at the front. The front door entered directly into the living room. The side door, if entering the home, was off to the right, on the far side of the kitchen. In the living room was one large 6x8 glass window covered with blackout curtains at the front of the house. Okay, so here's the story. It's late, probably around 11 p.m. Lisa and I were tuckered out, and we cuddled up on one of the couches to watch the London Olympics. She dozed off, head on my chest, and I'm left there happily pinned down. Suddenly, the front doorknob starts to shake. I'm caught off guard, because it's summer in an empty college town, and we weren't expecting anyone. It stops for a moment, then the doorknob shakes more violently this time. Thankfully, it's locked. As I prepared to slide out from under Lisa to investigate, 3 loud bangs against the door, as if someone was trying to kick it open. Their attempt failed. I'm partially relieved, but I'm still aware that there are 2 doors that they could enter. Lisa is awake now, delirious and frantic. What's going on? What was that? I hushed her and told her to get up and go to the back of the house, and to go into the bedroom and lock the door until I personally came to get her. She refused, but I demanded. She scurried across the couches and locked herself in the back room. I ran to the far side of the kitchen to make sure the side door was locked. It is. Okay, we're alright for now. Thinking to myself, weapon, what can I use? Shit, I wish I had a gun. Maybe the brothers left something. Shotgun would be ideal. I see a hunting bow with a few arrows. No, that's too cumbersome. Keep looking. Golf club. 6-iron. Perfect. Everything is silent, aside from the pounding heartbeat and the faint sound of Lisa calling the cops from the back room. I'm standing in the kitchen and have a view of the front door and the side door while clutching the golf club, when suddenly the side door knob starts shaking and there's a couple of bangs at the door. Lisa screams from the back of the house and I yell at the intruder. We're in here. We called the cops. They'll be here any second. Leave us alone. The banging stops. It's silent. Dead silent. We wait for the cops to come. Lisa and I are in the living room, full of couches. 2 full hours pass. It's now something like 2:30, and still no signs of the cops. I'm both exhausted from the adrenaline crash, and angry that the cops had not come. We call them again. 911, what's your emergency? Hi. We called about 2 hours ago to report an intruder, but no cops ever came. Are you still in the home? Did the intruders make it inside? Yes, we're inside. They didn't get in, but I'm scared that they're going to come back. The operator asked me for my address. I'm literally spelling out my address. The front door gets slammed, kicked again. I holler at the 911 operator. They're back. Please help. Hurry. Officers are on their way. Stay on the phone. Keep away from the windows and doors. Lisa is freaking out. I'm freaking out, wielding a golf club again. And suddenly, the entire front window, all 6x8, shatters to pieces. The glass is mostly contained by the black curtains. And I screamed the girliest, most blood-curdling scream I could imagine. I stood up and started swinging the golf club wildly, hoping to make contact with whatever or whoever was coming into the house. Moments later we hear sirens, and I could faintly see the blue lights swirling outside through the split in the curtains. A megaphone announces the police presence. They scour the area, and eventually knock on the door. Apparently, someone did try to kick down both doors, and there are boot prints to prove it. The window was shattered by a malt liquor bottle. They ended up finding a drunk dude from the trailer park nearby, who had been roaming the area. I bought a gun the next day. This happened very recently, only about 4 days ago, while I was camping with my best friend. We were both seniors in high school, and we were on a road trip for spring break. We live in Oregon, and drove down the coast to Northern California. We had a late start leaving our houses, and arrived at a little beach south of the Redwoods just after 9 p.m. It was pouring rain, and dark out, so we parked on a dirt road that had access to the beach, and decided against walking down the sand to set up camp. My friend drives a Toyota pickup with a camper shell covering the bed, which has a mattress in the back, so we decided to just sleep there. The beach area where we were was very secluded and belonged to a local Native American tribe that didn't mind visitors using the site, as long as they were respectful. After talking for a while in the shelter of the truck, my friend falls asleep. Before drifting off myself, I realized I had forgot to lock the passenger door of the truck. All of our valuables were stored in the cab, so I hoped nobody would come along and rob us in our sleep. After a dreamless few hours of sleep, I heard the sound of the driver's side door handle of my friend's truck begin to lift. The door happened to be locked, and I was awake at this point. Terrified whoever had been trying to open the door would go around to the unlocked side, or try to get into the bed, where they likely had no idea we were sleeping. It was still dark out at this time, but I heard footsteps start to walk around the back of the truck. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it through the back of the window of the camper shell, in hopes of alerting the intruder that people were in the vehicle. I heard footsteps get a little farther away. Then I heard the sound of sticks snapping and something heavy being thrown. Then the man let out a long, guttural yell. A few moments passed and more things were thrown, and more general yells mixed with the occasional F-bomb at the top of his lungs. It didn't take more than 2 or 3 yells before I woke up my friend. Dude, There's a crazy man outside. He tried to get in the truck. Now he's walking around yelling. As I shook his shoulder. My friend sat upright and tried to peer out the window, but it was still pitch black out. I checked my phone, and it was 5 a.m. The sounds of the man walking around the woods near our truck didn't let up. Neither did the frequent yells and sounds of him throwing and smashing what I could only guess were logs or large rocks. Occasionally we would hear his yells from farther away, and we thought he was leaving, only to have him return yelling right by our truck only moments later. We sat huddled in fear for a good hour, unsure what to do. His shout sounded as though he was full of rage, but never attempted to get into the truck again. Eventually, the owners of the other car that was parked on the dirt road came up to the vehicle and drove off as the sky started to lighten. We didn't hear any more yelling or log throwing after that. We eventually were both able to fall back asleep for a few hours, waking up around 10 a.m. It was hard to believe that terrifying hour at the crack of dawn even happened, but both of us remember it too vividly to dispute. We still have no idea what the man was doing or why he sounded so angry. But to the guy screaming profanities in the dark by our truck, let's not meet.